Maybe you should stick to serving coffee instead of playing soldier." The words cut through the morning air like a blade as Scarlett Madison adjusted the 10-pound weight attached to the end of her rifle barrel. Around the training range, her male counterparts snickered at Sergeant Major Powell's dismissive comment, treating her presence like an elaborate joke. She was strikingly beautiful, platinum blonde hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail, emerald green eyes that seemed to hold secrets, and features that belonged more on a magazine cover than a military firing range. At 26, she looked like she'd walked off a modeling shoot rather than enlisted in one of the most demanding sniper training programs in the world. "10 pounds, Madison? What's next, a bowling ball?" called out Private Henderson, earning appreciative laughs from the group. Scarlett said nothing, methodically checking her weapon's balance with the additional weight. Rain began to patter against the concrete, turning the morning gray and misty. While other recruits headed for cover, she remained in position, adjusting her scope with mechanical precision. What they didn't know was that the woman they were mocking had been training with that 10-pound weight for 8 months, developing muscle memory and stability that would make most professional marksmen weep with envy. And in exactly 6 weeks, when she faced Jackson Apex Kane, the legendary sniper known as the King of Soldiers, their laughter would die in their throats.
Welcome to Quiet Tales Studio. Before we continue this story of determination and deadly precision, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. Fort Bragg's Advanced Sniper Training Program represented the pinnacle of military marksmanship. Only the top 1% of qualified soldiers even received an invitation to attempt the grueling 6-month course. The washout rate was 87%. Scarlett Madison had earned her place through sheer determination and scores that defied explanation. She'd outshot seasoned veterans during preliminaries, hitting targets at ranges that made instructors double-check their equipment. But none of that mattered to the 23 other recruits who saw only a blonde distraction in their boys' club. "Listen up, maggots!" Sergeant Major Powell's voice echoed across the range as the morning briefing began. He was a 30-year veteran whose reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning. 3 wars, countless confirmed kills, and a methodology that had produced some of the deadliest marksmen in military history. "This isn't a video game," Powell continued, his steel-gray eyes scanning the assembled recruits. "This is about life and death. Your life, your teammates, lives, and the lives of every civilian counting on you to put steel on target when it matters most." The recruits stood at attention, but Scarlett could feel their sideways glances like physical weight. She'd grown accustomed to the stares, the whispered comments about her appearance, the assumptions about why she was really there. "Today we begin ballistics assessment," Powell announced. "Standard targets at 400 yards. Weather conditions are suboptimal, visibility limited. This separates the pretenders from the professionals." As the group dispersed to their assigned positions, Scarlett began her ritual. She attached the 10-pound weight to her rifle barrel, transforming the precision instrument into something that looked more like medieval torture device. "What the hell is that supposed to be?" asked Corporal Rivers, the closest thing the program had to a bully. He was everything the military recruiting posters promised: square-jawed, broad-shouldered, and utterly convinced of his own superiority. "Training aid," Scarlett replied simply, not looking up from her weapon inspection. "Training aid?" Rivers laughed. "Sweetheart, the idea is to make the shot easier, not harder." "Is it?" Scarlett's green eyes met his for the first time. There was something in that gaze that made Rivers' smirk falter slightly, something that suggested depths he couldn't fathom. The rain intensified, turning the range into a waterlogged obstacle course. Most recruits struggled with visibility and wind compensation. Scarlett took her position, rifle weighted like an anchor, and began her breathing sequence. Inhale, hold, natural respiratory pause, squeeze. The shot rang out, cutting through the rain like thunder. Downrange, the target showed a perfect center hit. Powell raised his binoculars, studying the result with professional interest. "Madison again." Scarlett cycled another round, repeated her process. Another perfect hit. Again. 7 consecutive shots, 7 perfect hits, each time fighting not just the target, but the additional 10 pounds that turned every micro-adjustment into a monumental effort. "Enough," Powell said finally. "Next shooter." As Scarlett secured her weapon, she caught Powell's eye. For just a moment, the dismissive mask slipped, replaced by something that might have been grudging respect. Rivers took his position next, rifle unweighted, confidence radiating from every movement. His first shot missed center by 3 inches, his second by 4. By the 5th, he was visibly frustrated, compensating for conditions he couldn't read as clearly as the woman he'd been mocking. That afternoon, in the barracks that served as their temporary home, the division became more pronounced. 23 men on one side, sharing stories and building camaraderie. One woman on the other, isolated by circumstance and choice. "She won't last a week," Rivers muttered to his bunkmate. "This isn't about political correctness, it's about physical capability." "Did you see those shots?" asked Private Martinez, a quiet kid from New Mexico who'd earned his place through pure natural talent. 7 for 7 in that rain. With that weight. "Lucky," Rivers dismissed. "Wait until the pressure's really on." Across the room, Scarlett cleaned her rifle with methodical precision. She'd heard every word, just as she'd heard similar conversations for the past month. They thought she was weak because she was beautiful. They thought she was fragile because she was feminine. They thought she was temporary because they couldn't imagine otherwise. They had no idea that she'd been preparing for this moment since she was 12 years old, when her father, a Marine sniper who died in Fallujah, had taught her that precision was about more than natural talent. It was about dedication to a degree that bordered on obsession. Every morning at 04:00, while her fellow recruits slept, Scarlett was on the range. Rain or shine, she practiced with that 10-pound weight, building strength and stability that defied her delicate appearance. Every shot was a promise to the memory of a man who'd believed she could be extraordinary if she was willing to pay the price. 3 weeks into the program, Sergeant Major Powell gathered the remaining recruits. They were down to 18 now, 5 having already washed out, for a special announcement. "Next month, you'll have the opportunity to participate in an exhibition match," he began, his tone carrying unusual gravity. "You'll be shooting against someone I want you to meet." The door to the briefing room opened, and a figure stepped through that made every recruit straighten unconsciously. He was tall without being imposing, quiet without being weak, and carried himself with the controlled precision of someone who'd spent decades perfecting his craft. "This is Master Sergeant Jackson Kane," Powell continued. "Some of you might know him by his call sign, Apex. He holds the record for longest confirmed kill in military history, 2,437 yards. Moving target, crosswind." The recruits stared with something approaching religious awe. Apex was a legend, the kind of sniper other snipers told stories about in hushed, reverent tones. Kane's eyes swept the room, cataloging each face with professional assessment. When his gaze reached Scarlett, it lingered for just a moment, not with the dismissive evaluation she'd grown accustomed to, but with something that might have been curiosity. "The exhibition will consist of 3 rounds," Powell explained, "increasing difficulty, decreasing margin for error. It's not a competition. None of you are at that level yet. It's a learning opportunity." "What's the point?" Rivers asked with characteristic bluntness. "We all know how it's going to end." Kane spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd never needed to raise it. "The point, Corporal, is to show you what's possible when preparation meets opportunity. Some of you might surprise yourselves." His eyes found Scarlett again, and this time there was no mistaking the assessment. He'd noticed something the others had missed. That evening, as the barracks settled into its usual routine, Kane appeared at Scarlett's workstation where she was breaking down her rifle for the nightly cleaning ritual. "Interesting training methodology," he said, nodding toward the 10-pound weight that lay beside her weapon like a sleeping metal snake. "Sir?" "The weight. Not standard issue, I'm guessing." Scarlett paused in her cleaning, unsure whether this was criticism or genuine interest. "No, sir." "Personal modification." "How long?" 8 months, sir." Kane picked up the weight, testing its heft with the hands of someone who understood exactly what 8 months of training with 10 extra pounds would do to muscle memory and stability. "Your father teach you that?" The question hit like a physical blow. Scarlett's hand stilled on her rifle, and for a moment the careful composure she'd maintained for weeks threatened to crack. "How did you?" Staff Sergeant Michael Madison, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines. Fallujah, 2006. He was good, very good. Kane set the weight down gently. He would have been proud. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, but it changed everything. For the first time since arriving at Fort Bragg, Scarlett felt seen, not as a woman in a man's world, not as a curiosity or a political statement, but as a sniper. Someone who understood that precision was both art and science, requiring dedication that most people couldn't fathom. The remaining weeks of training took on new intensity. Word of the exhibition spread through the base like wildfire, drawing attention from officers and enlisted personnel who wanted to witness the legendary apex in action. Betting pools formed. Speculation ran wild. Through it all, Scarlett maintained her routine. 0400 wake-up, range time with the weighted rifle, standard training, evening maintenance. She said little, listened to everything, and prepared with the methodical thoroughness her father had taught her. Rivers and his followers maintained their dismissive attitude, but uncertainty had crept into their mockery. Scarlett's scores remained consistently perfect, her composure unshakable. Even Powell had stopped making cutting remarks about coffee service. The night before the exhibition, Scarlett discovered her rifle had been tampered with. She'd returned to the barracks after a late training session to find her weapon scope mount slightly loosened, the adjustment mechanisms thrown off by degrees that would be invisible to casual inspection but devastating to precision shooting. It was professional sabotage, subtle enough to look like equipment failure, thorough enough to guarantee humiliation. Rivers sat on his bunk 30 feet away, cleaning his own weapon with exaggerated care. Their eyes met across the room, and his smirk told her everything she needed to know. Most shooters would have panicked. 3 weeks of preparation, ruined by petty jealousy and masculine insecurity. The smart play would be to report the sabotage, demand an investigation, postpone the exhibition until replacement equipment could be obtained. Instead, Scarlett spent the night rebuilding her rifle from memory, recalibrating every adjustment with the precision of someone who'd done it hundreds of times in darkness and under pressure. By 0300, the weapon was better than it had been before the sabotage. At 0400, she was on the range, confirming 0 with the weighted barrel, preparing for what she knew would be the most important day of her military career. The exhibition began at 0800 with perfect weather, clear skies, minimal wind, optimal visibility. A crowd had gathered that included most of the base's senior staff, curious onlookers, and a small contingent of military journalists who'd gotten wind of the story. Kane took his position with the casual confidence of someone who'd done this thousands of times. His rifle was a work of art, custom-built, perfectly balanced, worth more than most people's cars. No weights, no artificial challenges, just pure professional perfection. First round, Powell announced, 800 yards, stationary target. Both shooters prepared simultaneously. Kane's process was efficient, economical, a master craftsman at work. Scarlett's was ritualistic, deliberate, each movement practiced to the point of muscle memory. The weighted rifle fought her, demanding compensation for the extra mass that threw off natural balance. But 8 months of training had taught her to work with the challenge rather than against it. 2 shots rang out in perfect synchronization. Downrange, both targets showed center hits. Second round, 1,200 yards, elevated position crosswind. The difficulty increased dramatically. At 1,200 yards, factors like humidity and barometric pressure became variables that could turn a perfect shot into a complete miss. The crosswind added another layer of complexity, requiring calculations that separated true marksmen from casual shooters. Kane adjusted his scope with mechanical precision, reading conditions with decades of experience. Scarlett performed the same calculations, but with the added challenge of compensating for 10 pounds of dead weight that wanted to pull her rifle off target. Again, 2 shots. Again, 2 perfect hits. The crowd stirred. This wasn't what anyone had expected. Final round. Powell announced, his voice carrying unusual tension. 1,500 yards, moving target. As if summoned by the drama of the moment, storm clouds gathered overhead. Within minutes, rain began falling, first in scattered drops, then in sheets that reduced visibility to mere yards. The wind picked up, turning the range into a meteorological obstacle course. "Weather's turning," Kane observed, his first word since the exhibition began. "Might want to postpone this until conditions improve." Powell looked to Scarlett. "Madison? Your call." Every eye was on her now. The journalists, the officers, the fellow recruits who'd spent weeks dismissing her as a novelty. Rivers stood with his arms crossed, confident that weather and pressure would finally expose her as the fraud he believed her to be. Scarlett studied the range through the curtain of rain and mist. 1,500 yards was at the extreme edge of her rifle's effective range under perfect conditions. With the weather, visibility near zero, and the 10-pound weight throwing off every calculation, it was borderline impossible. She thought about her father, who died fighting for people who would never know his name. About 8 months of 0400 wake-ups and ridicule from men who couldn't imagine that determination might matter more than natural advantage. "I'm ready," she said. Kane nodded with something that might have been respect. "Ladies first." Scarlett took her position, the weighted rifle heavy in her hands. Through her scope, she could barely make out the target through the rain and mist. She began her calculations. Wind speed and direction, bullet drop compensation, the physics of projectile motion through adverse weather. The weight wanted to pull her off target. The rain distorted her vision. The wind pushed against her from 3 different directions. She thought about precision, about dedication, about the difference between wanting something and being willing to sacrifice everything to achieve it. Natural respiratory pause, gentle squeeze. The shot echoed across the range like thunder. For long seconds, nobody moved. The rain continued to fall, and visibility remained near zero. Then, Powell's radio crackled with a report from the target pit. "Dead center hit. Repeat, dead center hit." The crowd erupted. Even the journalists were on their feet, recognizing they'd witnessed something extraordinary. Rivers stood frozen, his worldview cracking like badly set concrete. Kane approached, extending his hand with the respect due a fellow professional. "Outstanding shot. Thank you, sir." "That weight, how long did it take to adjust to the additional mass?" "About 4 months to feel natural, sir." "Another 4 to achieve consistency." Kane nodded slowly. "Your father would be proud." As the crowd dispersed and the rain continued to fall, Scarlett secured her weapon with the same methodical care she'd shown for months. The weight that had once been a burden now felt like an old friend, a reminder that excellence required sacrifice, and that the hardest challenges often produced the greatest rewards. 6 months later, Sergeant Scarlett Madison graduated at the top of her sniper class with scores that broke several training records. The 10-pound weight had been retired, replaced by a standard rifle that felt almost impossibly light after months of weighted training. She received orders for deployment with an elite reconnaissance unit, her skills recognized at the highest levels of military command. But before she left Fort Bragg, there was one final conversation. Kane found her on the range during her last evening training session, preparing for deployment with the same methodical care she'd shown throughout the program. "I wanted to give you something," he said, extending a small wooden box. Inside was a bullet casing, engraved with coordinates and a date from 2004. "My longest shot," Kane explained, "held the record for 8 years. Sir, I couldn't." "You earned it? That shot in the storm? I've been doing this for 20 years, and I wouldn't have attempted it under those conditions. With or without the weight." Scarlett held the casing up to the light, understanding the significance of the gift. It wasn't just recognition. It was acceptance into a brotherhood that had nothing to do with gender or politics and everything to do with skill, dedication, and the willingness to face impossible challenges. "The weight was your father's idea?" Kane asked. His philosophy: make training harder than reality, so reality feels easy. Smart man. As they stood on the range where she'd endured months of mockery and dismissal, Scarlett reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The beautiful blonde who'd been dismissed as a distraction had become something else entirely, a weapon in the truest sense, forged through adversity and tempered by determination. Rivers had washed out in week 7, his natural arrogance, no match for the program's demanding standards. Several others had followed, learning too late that wanting something wasn't the same as being willing to pay the price to achieve it. But Scarlett had endured, not because she was stronger than the men who'd doubted her, but because she'd understood something they hadn't, that excellence was a choice, and every choice came with a cost. The 10-pound weight had been her payment plan, 8 months of compound interest on a debt to her own potential. And when the moment came to collect on that investment, she'd been ready. As the sun set over Fort Bragg for the last time, Scarlett packed her gear with the same precision she brought to everything else. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new doubts to overcome, new standards to exceed. But tonight, she was simply a sniper, one of the best in the world, regardless of what anyone had expected when they first saw a beautiful blonde woman trying to play in what they thought was a man's game. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon is the one nobody sees coming. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating others, but from proving something to yourself. Sometimes strength isn't about what you can lift, but what you're willing to carry. And sometimes the weight that others see as your burden becomes the very thing that makes you unbeatable. At Quietail Studio, we believe that excellence recognizes no boundaries except those we place on ourselves. Have you ever had to prove yourself against impossible odds? Share your story in the comments below. And remember, never underestimate someone who's willing to make training harder than reality. You never know what they're preparing for. Thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button for more stories about hidden strength and quiet determination. We'll see you in the next one.